Hey, thanks for stopping by. Today I want to discuss one of the most important events that happened in Elden Ring, Marika's original sin. I'm going to make the case for why Marika's desire to ascend to godhood and her following the ritual and the Secret Rite Scroll was her original sin. According to the Remembrance for Mesmer, we learn that Mesmer was hidden away in the realm of shadow, keeping company with the original sin and a hatred that would not be confined. Keeping company with implies that Mesmer is in close proximity to this original sin, so I think it makes sense that the original sin is also hidden away in the Shadow Keep. And if that's the case, the best candidate would be the Secret Rite Scroll. My strongest piece of evidence that connects the original sin to the Secret Rite Scroll comes from the Christian doctrine of original sin, but let's put a pin in that for now. The connection between the sin and the scroll is backed up by a very interesting and subtle difference between the English and the Japanese. See, there is a very specific kanji for the term original sin, but Mesmer's Remembrance doesn't use that, and we know that FromSoft is familiar with that kanji, since that was used to describe Aldia as the scholar of the first sin, or as Loki put it, the researcher of original sin. Instead of using the kanji for original sin, the Japanese in Mesmer's Remembrance can be translated along the lines of the sin of the beginning, and this is a direct link to the opening lines of the story trailer.
Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning.
I think this is a great example of Elden Ring being a bilingual text. Gamers in the West have a clear allusion to a Christian theological concept, while Japanese gamers have a clear connection to Marika at the Gate of Divinity, and both translations are necessary to fully understand what's going on. And while you could try to have a translation that would try to convey both meanings, it would end up sounding very clunky and repetitive, like the original sin of the beginning. Now, the Secret Rite Scroll is one of the most important items in the game for lore hunting, since it explains how both Marika and Miquella became a god. According to its description, this is a scroll made of white tree bark. Few can decipher the scroll, which describes the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, said to be found at the tower enshrouded by shadow. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. So to recap, to perform the secret rite of the Divine Gateway, you need three components: a vessel, a lord, and a god. When we fight Miquella, Miquella is the god, Radahn is the lord, and Mohg is the vessel. But as Ansbach tells us, this ritual was also performed by Marika.
The Tower of Shadow houses a divine gateway. A well-kept secret it was, but the gateway was once the birthplace of a god we know all too well.
And I think we saw this in the story trailer. More specifically, I think the Secret Rite Scroll is a variation of the process of divine invocation used by the Hornsent. A key part of Hornsent culture was calling on different divine beasts, like lions and birds. There's also the Horned Warrior Ashes, which state that in the tower, these warriors and their weapons both are spiritual vessels. We also get to see divine invocation in action in the opening cutscene for the Divine Beast Dancing Lion boss fight. Fun fact, the Hornsent Grandam can have different lines if you kill her beforehand. So in the Hornsent culture, when a warrior performs divine invocation, they become a vessel for that power. If you wear the best helmet in the game and talk to Horny Granny, she says,
"I am pure vessel of the Sacred Beast. After an eternity of the mind, our voices have at last reached the heavens, as evinced by thy gracious arrival."
But Marika was able to invoke a beast that was much more powerful, the Elden Beast. In the story trailer, the music is deliberately reminiscent of the Elden Beast OST.
An affair from which gold arose.
While the final shot reminds me a lot of both the Elden Beast arena and the Memory of First Grace we see in the menu. We even got a small clue in the base game, since at the Queen's Bedchamber in Lane Dell, we can see scrolls made out of white tree bark, kind of like the Secret Rite Scroll. But there is a crucial distinction between Marika and Miquella's ascent to godhood. Initially, I believe that instead of being the god, Marika was the vessel, and the Elden Beast was the god. See, when you defeat the Elden Beast, God Slain shows up, yet Marika is still around, though it's unclear if she's still conscious or even alive. But while Marika started out as the vessel, thanks to the ritual, she eventually became a god. After all, Marika is called a god multiple times throughout the game.
Slay the god Marika, who cursed us all.
As Enya tells us,
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision, a god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erd Tree, a grim punishment for shattering the Order. Despite her godhood,
Marika's trespass demanded a heavy sentence. But even in shackles, she remains a god and the vision's vessel.
And as Corrin tells us,
the Golden Order is founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god.
And like so much of Elden Ring's lore, Marika being a vessel of the Elden Ring was once again very literal. I think this is a deliberate parallel to the jarring truth we learned about Marika and the Shaman Village. In other words, Marika was the jar. I'll also point out that the Elden Beast was the living incarnation of the concept of order, and the Minor Erdtree spell, which was a secret incantation of Queen Marika, has only the kindness of gold without order. So I think Marika visited her village one last time to pay her respects, right before she left to become a vessel for the Elden Beast. And Marika, exuding the kindness of gold, is also a clear parallel to Miquella.
I'll make the world a gentler place.
For more insight into Marika, let's turn to the concept of original sin, derived from the Book of Genesis, and can refer to both the original sin committed in the Garden of Eden, as well as the consequences of that sin.
Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her. And he did eat, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden.
The term original sin can have subtle but very critical distinctions between Christian denominations. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on Augustine, since he popularized the doctrine of original sin, and he was also a highly influential saint in the Roman Catholic Church. In addition, the first Christian missionaries who reached Japan were Catholic, and as anyone who's played Dark Souls or Bloodborne can tell you, FromSoft has a bit of a thing for Catholic art and architecture. As Augustine put it, the deliberate sin of the first man is the cause of original sin. For Augustine, this desire to become like gods, to live for himself, ensnared man in the open and manifest sin of doing what God had forbidden. For pride is the beginning of sin, and what is pride but the craving for undue exaltation? The desire to become a god is this original sin that has tainted the lands between. These lines about pride reminded me of Goldmask and the fatal conceit he saw in Marika's Golden Order. According to his mending rune of perfect order, the current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. In addition to the book of Genesis, Augustine based his arguments on chapter 5 of Paul's letter to the Romans.
From the moment then, when by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men in whom all sinned, the entire mass of our nature was ruined beyond doubt, and fell into the possession of its destroyer. And from him no one, no, not one, has been delivered or is being delivered or ever will be delivered, except by the grace of the Redeemer.
For Augustine, the original sin fundamentally changed human nature, since Adam's sin was passed on to all men. Augustine also blamed the faulty condition of human seed as the vehicle for transmitting original sin through human generations. In other words,
sin is stored in the balls.
Let's get back to Elden Ring. The idea that sin can be transmitted between generations reminds me of Amir's speech.
I fear that you have borne witness to the whole of it. The conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Erd Tree. The follies of men. Their bitter suffering. Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start. Marika herself, and the fingers that guided her. And this is what troubles me. No matter our efforts, if the roots are rotten, then we have little recourse. Ever young Miquella saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness. A tragedy, if ever there was one. That he would feel compelled to renounce everything when the blame lay squarely with the mother.
Now, there are a few key distinctions between original sin in Western Christianity and how it's presented in the game. Amir's line that there is no hope for redemption. Obviously, in Christianity, Jesus is that hope for redemption. Now, what's interesting is that in a lot of Christian thought, Jesus is sometimes described as a second Adam, since he is the one who is going to redeem the original sin committed by Adam. So in a similar vein, I do wonder if Marika also is there to atone for and redeem her original sin of trying to ascend to godhood.
For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous.
There is some pretty obvious Christian symbolism with Marika being crucified, and to make this parallel even clearer, some early Christians compared the cross to a tree.
Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree.
Yet in the DLC, we learn that Miquella feels tremendous guilt for his mother's actions and wants to atone.
Miquella has said as much himself. He wishes now to throw it all away. He says the act, though undoubtedly painful, will sear clean the Earth Tree's wanton sin. The truth of his claim can be found at each cross. It is evidence enough to earn my belief.
Miquella, grant him forgiveness.
But I think Marika doesn't want Miquella to ascend to godhood. Unlike the other demigods, the Tarnished are only guided by grace to kill Miquella once it becomes possible for Miquella to become a god. A generous reading of Marika's actions is that she is trying to prevent Miquella from committing the same mistake that she made. Like Eve in the Garden of Eden, I believe that Marika was seduced into becoming a god. After Placidusax's god was fled, the Two Fingers needed a new god as a replacement, and Marika's Shaman Village just so happens to overlook the finger ruins of Deo, and the name Deo is most likely a reference to the Latin for God, Deo. But over time, Marika would have second thoughts and sought a way to escape her godhood. Marika's source seal tells us that solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike a curse from which there is no deliverance. That could explain why she enlisted Hugh to forge a weapon to slay a god. And in the DLC, Saint Trina, Miquella's discarded half, says,
Godhood would be Miquella's prison. A cage divinity is beyond saving.
Instead, Marika will bear the burden of cleansing away sin. Unlike Adam and Eve, there were multiple different cultures before Marika. And while Adam and Eve lived in a paradise, Marika... not so much. Since Adam and Eve were the first humans, sin essentially spread to everyone. But if a similar theory of transmission is at play, that would mean the original sin would only taint Marika's bloodline. Based on this, I have some unhinged speculation that Marika might have been an Eve that gave birth, quite literally, to new races of people. And if that's the case, this would mean that the Tarnished are also part of Marika's bloodline, and would also be cursed with original sin. And for what it's worth, several NPCs do say that the Tarnished are cursed.
Slay the god Marika, who cursed us all.
They will fight, and they will die in an unending curse.
What's more, in the 1.0 version, the Nox were called the descendants of Marika and members of the Empyrean family. So there is precedent for the idea that Marika could actually have seeded a much larger family. We do know her flesh melds harmoniously with others. The Hornsent Grandam also calls Marika,
Listen, progeny of the wanton's trumpet. For thy sins thou shalt have thy recompense. The Sacred Beast shall unleash its ire.
I do want to clarify a few things that might come up in the comments. Original sin is not the same thing as cardinal sin, both in Christianity and in the game. For Elden Ring,
The burning of the Earth Tree is the first cardinal sin. Doing so will unbind destined death and slay the world itself.
so Marika's original sin is completely separate from the cardinal sin of burning the Erd Tree.
The seduction and the betrayal.
As for who or what seduced Marika, I'll cover that in a separate video. For the betrayal, I have two theories. It may have been forbidden for someone like Marika to access the gates of divinity. She was just supposed to be a shaman, bred for life in a jar, so her performing the ritual was a betrayal of her allotted status. As an NPC Hornsent tells us, for pity's sake, your place is in the jar. Nigh sainthood itself awaits you within. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Life were you accorded for this alone. My second idea is that the betrayal refers to when Mesmer became the least genocidal Stellaris player, and this is backed up by multiple NPCs.
Take vengeance upon Mesmer and his lot. They who betrayed us, they who burned us. Let them face in thy wrath their just deserts.
The Earth Tree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed, set aflame.
While it doesn't matter too much for this theory, I personally think Radagon was the Lord in this three-part setup. We also see in the story trailer that Marika looks a bit more androgynous than usual. A lot of people pointed out the hair color seems to be in between Marika and Radagon, though it could just be the lighting. We also find Rada fruit all throughout the Land of Shadow. In addition, in the English version, there was another mention to original sin in Miquella's Great Rune, but as I discussed in another video, that unfortunately was a major mistranslation. In the Japanese, there's no mention of sin at all. Instead, the key term is inga, which was translated as causality in the base game. So instead of trying to bury the original sin, as it says in English, Miquella's goal is instead to try to go beyond causality. And if you want to know what that is, I go into much more detail about how Miquella is deeply influenced by Buddhism. Now, in response to that video, some people argued that original sin wasn't a mistranslation of Inga, but instead was a localization. If that is the case, That honestly is much, much worse. There are definitely similarities between Christianity and Buddhism, which is one reason why many people in the West who have become disillusioned with the church have turned to Buddhism. That said, there are some pretty massive doctrinal differences between the concept of karmic causality in Buddhism and original sin in Christianity. The original sin was the inciting incident that introduced sin and or death into the world, whereas there is no real origin story for Buddhism. Karma is essentially a product of everyone's actions and is constantly in a state of flux. For most Christians, time is linear with a set beginning and an ending, whereas in Buddhism, it's much more of a system of cycles. You also only have one lifetime, whereas you'd have multiple lifetimes to try to escape samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. In fact, when Christian missionaries first reached Japan in the 16th century, Christianity was seen by many locals as a mistaken heretical offshoot of Buddhism, and one major point of contention was that Christianity did not teach Inga, the law of karma. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what Yins think.